Hello and welcome to Empyrean Investigations. My name is Richard, and I'm here to talk to you all about detectives and investigation stories in your game of Dungeons and Dragons. That's why I got on my sweet deer stalker here today. Um, Investigations are one of my favorite types of stories for adventurers, and they're very difficult ones to pull off. There's this sense of mystery, this wondering what's going to happen next, what could there be, and sometimes it kind of works in a big dungeon sense. I'm traveling through a dungeon trying to figure out what's next. Oh, it's a monster, it's a monster, it's a monster. Very combat heavy sort of thing. Sometimes an investigation is just out there in a town and I'm just trying to figure out what the heck is going on. And one of those rings a little bit clearer than the other ones sometimes. If I'm running through a combat and I'm getting clues at the end of every one of them, I know how combat works. Combat's great. I go in, I start punching things, I start doing my thing. I've got tons of rules for that. I'm ready to go. At the end of it, development, I find something out. And then I continue that path and I make my way through and the mystery is solved. In a more sandbox setting, in a more open world like in a city, how do you find out what to do? How do you discover evidence and clues that'll take you from one place to another and propel you through your DM's wild, mysterious narrative story? I love that stuff. And so what I did is I wrote this book called Empyrean Investigations, which is all about this kind of thing. There's some subclasses, there's some rules, there's some things, there's some cases for you to solve. There's all sorts of good stuff. But today what I want to do is really dig into one of them in particular, and talk a little bit about giving your players agency in an investigation by introducing many paths to success. This is a big deal that we already do in combat scenes. I mean, if we think about that, right? On your turn, it's combat time, you swing, you fight, and you miss. What do? I mean, you just wait for next turn, and your friends are already doing things. Maybe instead of missing, I learned that creature has resistance, and so my big hammer only does half damage, and so I swap over to a different weapon, or I start casting spells, right? A combat can be a puzzle. Sometimes there's a ritual to solve. Sometimes there's all sorts of other things, right? And as I run through the combat, I learn what those things are, and that helps me develop a strategy and a way to succeed in the fights. Investigations, not the same thing, because skill checks are a little bit more nebulous. It's harder to know what to do. Like, what do you do when you fail a skill check? Can I do it again? Do I have to? Is the scene over? Did we just lose? Is it over? This is a really big deal, and I find that players find themselves with less agency in these situations. So let's talk about how we can create these many paths for our characters. There are a couple ways already outlined in the Dungeon Master's Guide. Some of those sections we don't read through as much because they're like optional rules and optional rules. But there's a few in there that are very, very helpful, and I want to point these out. On page 242 in the DMG, there's a section on consequences to some of your actions. And two of them in particular are very helpful if your characters fail at a check. The first one is success at a cost. And this is from a lot of different narrative games. I love seeing it in D&D because it's very positive. It comes up when you fail, but only just a little. Like if you fail by 1 or 2, I would not increase that threshold anymore. But it means like the DC was 14 and you just rolled a 13 and everybody knows that you almost made it. Well, now's my chance as a DM to allow you to succeed. Sure, that's fine. I mean, I could just throw it away, and a lot of DMs kind of do that, knowing that a skill check failed is a problem to their game, so they'll be like, that works. But no, success at a cost. I will let you succeed. However, I'm going to add a complication to the story and increase kind of the tension of the scene. That's fantastic. In a combat, it's pretty easy. You have an AC 14, you roll to attack, you only got a 13. Here's the deal. I will allow you to succeed at that hit and deal your damage, but at the end of that, you are immediately going to fall prone. And suddenly that wasn't an outcome I saw coming. That wasn't possible before, right? And now I'm going to be prone. That means people get to hit me. Okay, that's a problem. And I, as the DM, haven't said that's what's happening. I have presented you with the bargain, and you as the player have to decide if that's something you want. Often when I use this rule, I find that players don't want to. They would rather just fail, because that's a consequence they understand. And then when, instead of falling prone, because prone is dangerous, they don't want to be prone, right? They know that. But the choice is theirs, which I find a lot of fun. Some people do want to take that opportunity because they want the hit. Maybe they're going to take that enemy out with that last hit. So they're really excited about the opportunity. Whatever happens, it's a tense moment, and people talk about what the stakes are. And that's really a lot of fun. It's a cool way to ramp up the tension of your scene. Another one is just below that. It's called degrees of failure. And this is an older rule I've seen in other systems, but it basically says that if you fail a check, but you don't fail it by too much, and usually the threshold is 5, I'll allow you to try it again. This was a big one for like picking locks with thieves. DC is way above 20. Well, if I fail once, but I still got like a 17, that's I didn't break the lock, or I didn't break my lock pick. So that kind of increases this retry ability, so that your characters, when you fail a check, if you didn't do too badly, you can go again. That's fine. But that becomes a little bit more problematic. In an investigation, like what is success at a cost? What's a cost you could throw into an investigation, right? It's combats, this all seems pretty easy. Some skill checks. Consider leaving evidence behind or destroying evidence, right? If you get success at a cost, maybe that means I'll let you find the clue, but you're going to leave a note here so that anyone else who comes through here will know that you arrived at this scene. And they might, come after you. They might ask you questions later on. All sorts of stuff could happen there. There's also the potential that if you fail too much and you're using that threshold, then you actually destroy the evidence you were looking for. Like, you were looking for a footprint and you realize too late that you have just stomped all over it. Basically, for any of these, you can watch Knives Out, and there's an entire destruction of evidence montage. It's just ridiculous. Just pick any of those and you should be good. I love those. I think they're a ton of fun. They do increase my ability as a DM to give my players more options and keep failure from being that ledge that kind of ruins skill moments. Now, the other thing that happens is that what if I do fail? What if I just, like, even with those are buffers. What if I just fail? What if I roll a 3 and the whole party rolls a 3? Is it over? Are we done? And to that, I have to say no. We need more options, though. And so one of the ones I wrote into Empyrean Investigations is a really big deal. I find this one very useful. It's giving players more options, right? Yeah, if I dig into here, this book goes into all sorts of things, like I said, but in the case files and evidence section, this is the beginning of my DM's only zone. There's some new rules to kind of change the game, and I'm going to talk about those a little bit more in this series on investigations. But what I want to jump into is investigators in crisis. Whew, that's the problem, right? What if they fail? Or, almost worse from a narrative standpoint, what if they just walk away from a scene and they didn't even look for the clue that I put there on purpose, and now their game, they're not going to know where to go? How do I fix that? How do I solve that problem? And so I started thinking about what are the other resources that players have. I mean, they often have them. They're not solving crimes in a vacuum, usually. I mean, if you have them on the plane of air solving crimes all on their own, that might be a different deal. But who could they talk to? Who could they get more help from? What other resources are there? And for this, I took a look at a lot of detective stories. Like, Sherlock Holmes doesn't work alone. He has a lot of folks that he will talk to at any moment to get assistance. In Knives Out, Benoit Blanc is right there with 2 detectives basically the whole time, even though he is not a member of the police department himself. He's a private investigator. So the easiest one, I think, is the lawful authorities. You could have some people that you go talk to. And in the 3 cases that I wrote for this, in 2 of them, specifically, you meet a member of the lawful authorities pretty fast. In both cases, they're a little bit beleaguered. They don't have all the resources that they need. They can't solve this on their own. They need your help. Also, you're good at this, so you should be able to do that. Talking to the lawful authorities, though, has consequences, right? They suddenly know that you were on the case. They probably wrote a note down in a book that you were all there. And as we know from crime TV, whenever this stuff happens, they get mad at you because you will probably mess something up at the scene. You'll contaminate the crime scene. So there's a lot of problems that you can have there, and you're also on the hook. If you fail at the case, you are in trouble. But at the same time, their investigators might come through and find a clue that you missed. And so anytime that comes up, if you're like, I'm stuck, I could go talk to those folks and see what else they know. And as a DM, I'm going to try and use that as a way to get that information back out to my players. Their earlier failure is not an end. It just means they have to go sideways a little bit to solve the problem. Similarly, they could go talk to the criminal underworld. This is one of my favorites because, again, if I don't know, if I'm investigating some smuggling down at the docks, probably the other smugglers at the docks are going to see that as competition. They're not excited. They're willing to help me out because, me solving a problem for them is great. And in fact, they, now we have this bargaining chip maybe I'm the one and I'm like, I'm doing you this favor. So when I come to you for information next time, you're going to help out. But more likely, the favor is going to be owed towards them because they're giving you this information. Now suddenly you're on the hook for like a little side mission that may or may not be totally legal, but hopefully not too far, because that would be a problem. In the case of the Charred In, my first case, I do have a person like this, right? Sherlock worked specifically with the people on the streets. I'm blanking on the name. But I have the Beggars Network, which is kind of exactly that group, added into this case, and their leader is willing to help you because they're good. They're trying to be helpful, but they are a member of this criminal organization at the same time. I love it. Last up is the Rumor Mill. And the Rumor Mill is fun, right? It's people who, true crime fans, they want to know everything that's going on. And so they are there to learn about it. They'll happily tell you everything they know because they know that the conversation that they are currently having is now part of the Rumor Mill. So you suddenly gain information. It might not all be correct. It might be a little, there's some lies thrown in, some exaggerations, and suddenly now you are part of that story, which I find to be a whole lot of fun. If I'm talking about like the fame of my players extending beyond this moment, right, I can use the Rumor Mill as a way to make that happen. Fame is tons of fun, and heroes who are investigators should certainly get their opportunity with fame and in the spotlight. So these are just a couple different ways that I like to use failure and many paths to success to make sure that my players have agency, even in an investigation moment, which feels like cliffs. It feels like if I can't solve this, I'm done. It's over. I need to have different ways around it, different paths, different options, and that doesn't come as easily as it does in like a combat situation where there are always paths lined out. I attack here or I attack here. Investigations can be the same. This is going to be the first in a series of investigative notes, advice sections for DMs in particular, and all of them are going to come from my experience with Empyrean Investigations, the book I wrote on detectives and detective stories. If you're interested in checking that out, it's available on Gumroad or DriveThruRPG, and I'll be putting links down in the description below. I am very excited to continue this conversation with all of you. We'll chat about this in the near future.